had bought and outfitted a trailer for the marching band. He said, if this isn't okay, we'll reconfigure it how you want it to be, but I just wanted to surprise you. Room for uniform cases. What we were doing, taking seats out of 15-passenger vans, cramming everything in there. And why this came to it, and we'd also cram things on buses. One night, a bus drove over one of our marching snare drums. People loading them out of the back of the bus. Buses parked close together. Somebody had closed a door. Drum laying there. The bus in front pulls off. Second bus thinks that everything's clear. Drives right over it. With Kevlar heads, it sounded like a mortar shell going off when it broke. But you know the driver of the first bus was the owner of the bus company. He came running back. He thought something bad had happened. He said, "What was that?" And I said, "Well, it's probably that." You said, "What is that?" I said, "It was a snare drum. It's not a snare drum anymore." So part of what our education is we have to create an audience for ourselves. We have to not have parents coming to concerts doing this. Oh, I hate this. Sitting down and going, literally, when's it's just going to start? You have to create an audience. You have to create excitement. That all comes from programming. Now, having said that, no, you're not going to play all music that sounds like this. Selections from, the themes from. No, you don't need to play pop music. What you need to do is challenge your audience. I was playing Mountains Rising Nowhere in here a little bit ago, and somebody's like, "Oh, that's Mountain Rising Nowhere." Do you guys know anything about Mountains Rising Nowhere? No? Okay. We're going to play a little bit for you because I'm going to tell you a short story of how we sell. And I do not and will not pay for ad-free. Just so you know, I will not. And to me now it's this thing. They can play 19 ads. They can start ads in the middle. They're not going to win. I'm going to win. As far as obstinance go, you are not going to beat me ever. Okay, so this is a little bit of Mountains Rising Nowhere. Glass crystals, 3 different chords of glass crystals. Amplified piano, 2 water gongs. It needs 16 tom-toms to play the piece, 5 bass drums to play the piece, 8 suspended cymbals, 9 different triangles. A kitchen sink? No, not a kitchen sink. But 2 wash tubs full of water. If you're listening to it, I am a timbre junkie. To me, interest in music to me is based on timbre. If you play that piece on a concert with no context, people will sit there and go, "What in the hell am I listening to?" You know how I preface this for the audience? I said, the next piece that you're going to listen to, you're not going to like. In fact, most of you will actually hate. And they're sitting there going, "Why would you say that?" And I said, because I'm going to stretch your listening way past what you're used to. But to me, my role as a teacher and not just a teacher of the students behind me, but a teacher of the audience, the only way you become more aware is to be put in uncomfortable listening situations. If you go into a practice room and you're comfortable with what you do in that practice room, when you leave that practice room, you did not gain anything. At best, you maintained. The only way growth happens is to be put in uncomfortable environments. Whether it's pushing you as a listener, whether it's pushing you as a technician, whether it's pushing you, however, uncomfort in those things make you better. If you only do things that are comfortable to you, there will not be the growth that you want it to be. I told the audience they weren't going to like that piece, and then we played 14 minutes of that piece. Standing ovation in the middle of the concert. And I'm like, that's not the reaction I thought that I was going to get. But here are some of the things that were said to me. When you said that, and I started to listen, and what we did is before we played it, we played some of the sound effects. We played, what does a water gong sound like? What is a water gong? You know? So, well, this is a water gong, and hopefully the percussion have changed the water over the last 2 or 3 weeks because you have 2 wash tubs full of water. And the percussion sometimes would get lazy. Ours aren't that way, I'm sure, here. They would get lazy, and so the water would just sit in the tubs in the storage room. Things tend to fall in the water, you know, dust, insects, and occasional rodents, and they get the water out sometimes. I said, boys, how long has it been since we've dumped that water out? I said, let's go ahead and do that. But, you know, so we played a water gong. We did some of the sections that were whistling. We played some of the amplification of the piano, a lot of crotale stuff, you know, bowed crotales, things of that nature. And so I got them to understand the sense of the timbres they were going to hear. Talked a little bit about the poem that Schwantner based this piece on. And I said, we're going to stretch what you believe you know what music is. We're going to stretch that past what you understand. And it's okay if you don't like it. It's okay if you leave here angry. Not one person came up to me afterwards and said, yeah, I really didn't like it. You know why? People hate to be told that they're going to dislike things. Honestly, you're not going to tell me whether I'm not going to like it. And so they tried to like it. Easy, right? You think about it? Because I could have just went out on stage and played this, and they would have all sat there after 15 minutes and went, what the? Right? And there would have been one of these. Instead, I had a non-major on Monday. This was a Saturday concert. On Monday, sent me a whole short story she composed during the concert and during her listening of that for the first time. She said, it's a movie soundtrack. She said, I started to listen to it, and I started to see things in my head as far as a movie playing out. So she said, I just wrote the story. And I'm like, that's really awesome, and we should talk more about this. But she was graduating, and she's like, yeah, no, but you can have the story, though. But it's all part of setting up your audiences. So how do we do that? You know, what I hear so many teachers say, and I want to slap them, but it's not appropriate today. This is something you could do 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but not today, is they said, I need to play music my students like. No, you don't. You need to play music your students need to know about and need to understand. And that's part of what we need to do. We're creating consumers of music. In your high school band, how many people do you think will major in music? A handful. All the rest of the people are the ones that are more important in there in some instances. You know why? You're creating consumers of music. You're creating people that are going to go out and buy, not CDs anymore, they're going to go out and download the next album. They're going to go out and download this and that. That is what we really need to be focused on, our non-majors. The students that just love it. You know this too. If there are majors and non-majors in an ensemble, majors have to be there in most cases. Non-majors don't. I've watched enough over the years that usually the non-majors are the ones that are really, really working. Not that the majors aren't, but there's sometimes a different level. Because some are there because they want to be there and love it. Some are there because they're tolerating it. Just throwing that out there. I'm not casting blame, throwing it out there. Right? So how do we achieve this? You can approach programming multiple ways. And what I mean by programming is thinking about the audience. An easy way to do, think about it as a meal. If you go out and you serve dessert, and dessert, and dessert, and dessert, selections from The Little Mermaid, followed by music of Aladdin, followed by theme from the movie Shaft, right? You kind of get my, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah? Silverado, throw Silverado in. There's a great rendition of Silverado. Bruce Broughton's a friend of mine, and if you don't know that movie, that soundtrack, find it. Silverado, Bruce Broughton. That's all dessert. Is dessert important to a meal? For me it is. You can tell. I don't build this without dessert. But you need to have appetizers. You need to have a salad. You need to have a main course. All of those are vital to the success. You know what the other thing is? If you have your audience sitting for 2 hours, they're not going to enjoy themselves. So how do you make it function so that they enjoy what they're doing? And this isn't a piece that we just listened to, not a piece you play at the end of the concert. Although the way they responded to that, I could have played at the end of the concert, but I was not anticipating that. The last thing you play in the concert should be something that everyone remembers, because that's what they're going to be whistling to the car. What are you whistling there? Absolutely nothing. You're shell-shocked a little bit. So, what are your appetizers? What are your salads? Another thing that I do, and this is going to be for the band side of things since that's where my expertise is, I also go with sometimes something new, something borrowed, something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. You're thinking, what? Old is old. Something that was written 20 years ago, 10 years ago. For some of you, old is 5 years ago. I scoff and laugh at thee for saying that. Something new, something that's recently been written. Premieres, we're going to talk about how you do premieres. I've been fortunate enough to conduct 16 world premieres of pieces in the last 8 years. And most of it I didn't pay for, which is, I'll tell you how to do that too. But because, anyone can conduct a world premiere, you have enough money. You ask a composer to write, you say, I'm going to give you $10,000. The composer will say, hell yeah, I'm going to write for you. When do you need it by? Right? So, old and new, borrowed, transcriptions. A choral piece for band. A band piece that there's an orchestra version of it. Whatever. And then something blue, something outside stylistic norms. West Side Story. I played that show 5 or 6 different times. You know why? Because I could play the read one book. I could sit down and play piccolo, flute, clarinet, and alto saxophone. And I could play that book. That book is not easy, but once you learn the book, then everyone knows you can play the book, then you get called a lot for gigs. But stylistically, if you don't know jazz and don't know how to play, there's a mambo in the middle of that. That's a little different than playing Brahms. Slightly, right? So what are you doing to become versed in all different styles and mediums? Folks that are band students, going to be teaching band, you should not just be listening to band music. String students, same way. Choral students, the same way. Rachmaninoff Vespers, one of my favorite choral pieces. Israel in Egypt, another one I sang. Carmina Burana, I sang. Beethoven's Ninth, I still remember it. I can sing you the tenor one part on cue. And I don't even know German, but I know that. Deine Sachen bin den wieder, was dein Mann strengt. Alle Menschen, deren Brüder von deinem Samstag Flügelball. Very impressive. I have no idea what I'm saying, but I learned that back as an undergrad at 19. And I still remember it. Just so you know, I'm not 19. Even close to 19. But it's one of those things that it had such an impact on me as a musician, I still remember it 30 years later. And that's being generous. It's been more than 30 years, but I'm going to leave it at 30 years. Right? So whatever you approach, you want to go meals, you want to go something old, something new, borrowed and blue. Just have some contrast and diversity. Now we're going to get into a little bit more of how to select that stuff. And some of you have the handout, some of you don't. The first thing we need to do, you need to know the body of music for which you are teaching. Let me ask you this. How many string orchestra folks in here? Okay? If you were to go into an interview with the superintendent and the principal, and they ask you this, of all the Beethoven symphonies, which is your favorite and why? And your response is this: Beethoven. Beethoven. He wrote symphonies? Do you think that they're going to say, thank you? Or are they going to hand you the job? They're going to say thank you, and they're going to figure out how we can get this person out of the room in the next 30 seconds, right? If you don't know the rep for the discipline you're teaching, how are you going to teach that discipline? I graduated not knowing the wind band rep except what I played in college and high school. I did know the orchestra rep, you know why? Because you studied music history. I did know a lot of the choral rep, you know why? We studied it in music history. How many times do you talk about wind music? You guys talk about Beethoven writing an octet? Talk about Dvorak writing wind pieces? Beethoven wrote a lot of marches. Did you know that? I didn't know any of that. Beethoven wrote marches that were so good that Hindemith took one of the Beethoven marches and wrote a piece based off the march that Beethoven wrote. Didn't know any of that. So I graduated not knowing the wind band rep and all, Mozart, the Grand Partita of Mozart. It's a 50-minute work. Didn't know about it as an undergrad. Wasn't until grad school I'm like, oh, that was dumb. Somebody stood in front of us and said, talk to me about the symphonies for bands. Now this was back before Maslanka and before some of those guys have written like 7, 8, 9 symphonies. And I could come up with one. You know why? It was the one we played in wind ensemble during my time in college. Just didn't know the rep. So then I started to seek it out. I started to seek out the rep. What are you doing to seek out the repertoire for your discipline? I know you're busy. I don't care. We've already decided we're all busy. Right? We're all busy. What are you doing to seek that rep out and to become familiar with it? You know why? That's going to help you to be able to discern whether the music you're about to look at is good or bad. You understand what I'm saying? If you don't have an idea of the repertoire, then when you are the professional in the building and somebody said, here's a piece of music, you can look at it and go, is this good? Is this bad? What criteria are you going to use? It's going to be on that page there. If you just turn the page, I've listed criteria for you. You don't even need to know, you just need to read it. Does that all make sense so far?
Yes.
All on the same page, right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So the process for selecting, actually no, I'm sorry. Composers and influential compositions. Go to where it said historically significant works. Did you know that Berlioz wrote a piece for wind band? I didn't, until I went to graduate school. And it's actually pretty good. Believe it or not, it sounds like Berlioz. Fascinating, huh? Look down through that list. Now, some of those folks, you might recognize some names. Mendelssohn, Saint-Saëns, Respighi. I heard Hunting Tower Overture the first time, and I said to somebody next to me, who did that transcription? And the person was a little bit judgmental. And so he looked at me and went, and I said, what? He said, Respighi did that. And I said, well, I didn't know that. So sorry. And now that you made me angry, I'm going to beat you up in the parking lot right after this. No, I didn't beat him up. I just told him I was going to. Respighi wrote a piece for winds. I had no idea. So when I listened to it the first time, I'm like, that is awesome. It's everything I love about Respighi's music, all put into about an 8-minute band piece. So what are you doing to learn about those pieces? I'm not saying that you need to be able to sit down and be able to, drop the needle, which you don't even know what drop the needle is because you don't have record players, you don't know what needles are. Drop the, scan and click, I guess is what they do now if they're trying to play a part. But, you know, literally they have a record playing, and Dr. God, it was God with a T, G-O-D-T, he would take the needle and he'd just drop it, and wherever he dropped it, he'd give us 10 seconds. Then he'd pull the needle up. And he said, what was that? You know, composer, title of the piece, movement. And then he'd also ask for, was that the exposition? Was that the development? Was that the... And I'm like, okay. I appreciated him. He was very passionate about what he did, but I also disliked him. So there was this love-hate relationship. So how many of these composers do you know? Prokofiev, Opus 99. We're playing that in the Spring with Wind Ensemble. Gordon Jacob, Original Suite. We just listened to Mountains Rising Nowhere. Persichetti Symphony for Band. Those of you who are percussionists, those of you who are going to be band directors, I would listen to Holst's First Suite and listen to the percussion writing in Holst's First Suite. Then I would go to the Persichetti Symphony for Band, Symphony number 6, which was written, Holst's First Suite, 1909. Persichetti Symphony for Band, written in the early 1950s. I don't want to quote, I think it's around 54. I'm not sure, though. It's around that time. And then listen to Joe Schwantner's Mountains Rising Nowhere in 1977. That's wind band percussion writing. What are the differences between those three? Do you know the Persichetti Symphony was the first time a composer used a percussion instrument in the wind band repertoire to state for the first time melodic material in the exposition of a symphony? First time. Persichetti did it. You know why? He was from Philadelphia. And he'd go to the Philadelphia orchestra rehearsals all the time and could not understand why anyone wanted to play percussion in an orchestra. You count 100 bars, you play cymbal crash, you count 60 more bars, you play another cymbal crash. He said, who would ever want to, why would you ever want to do that? I mean, he said that. He asked the question. So he said, when I started writing for band, I made sure that percussion always had things to play. And he was brilliant at that, too. Listen to the beginning. Listen, I'm not asking you to listen to his whole symphony, which is 18, 20 minutes. Listen to the first 2 minutes of the first movement. And listen to his intricate percussion writing. And then, fast forward 30 years later to what we just listened to of Joe Schwantner. You go, that's pretty fascinating. Pretty fascinating. But it's an understanding and awareness of how our repertoire is developed. You know where our repertoire developed out of? Transcriptions. I'm not picking on string players, but just so we know this. Do you know the average person in our country, when Wagner was alive and writing music, learned about Wagner not by hearing it played by an orchestra, but hearing it played by bands? You know why? Bands traveled. Bands played in small towns. The Sousa Band, the Gilmore Band, the Goldman Band. They were playing transcriptions of Wagner. So unless you lived in the city, New York, Chicago, you didn't have access to that music. But you did, because those bands were traveling around the country, playing in the small towns, playing in those little gazebos in the small towns. That's where people learned about Wagner, who lived in those small towns, because they didn't get to the symphony. We're going to go to the symphony. No, I'm going to be out plowing the field today. But you know what? On Sunday, I might go catch that concert down at the town square because I have to go into town anyway for groceries. That kind of thing. Pretty fascinating how some of that works. So now as we go through here, what composers were important for the genre you're going to be teaching? What composers were important to music? Now, I know a lot of you guys talked about these composers in music history, and then you think it's like more of a data dump. I'm going to memorize this, I'm going to regurgitate it on the test, and then I'm done. No, because when you go to grad school, you're going to have to do it again. They're going to give you a test to see how much you remember, and it won't be anything if you remember it like that. Right? I was one of those, I'm going to come clean with you guys. I was one of those that would cram the night before, get the A that I needed, and you know what I did after my last music history class? 5 of us, in a burn barrel in the courtyard of the music building, we burnt our grout books as we drank beer. Laughing. Grout got us back, because you know when I went back to grad school, what book I had to buy again? The same book that I burned 4 years later, or earlier. So don't burn your books, especially like when I graduated from college as an undergrad, I wasn't going back to school. I was done with school. It was fun and all. I'm done. I'm tired of school. The first morning of the first day of school, after the first hour, I realized how much I didn't know, and I was already thinking about how I was going to get back to school to learn more. And even when I finished student teaching, I'm like, I'm ready for this. Let's go. And then I realized, I'm not ready for this at all. My goodness, what am I going to do? And it was a learning process, but a great journey, but a learning process nonetheless. So, music history, pay attention. Take it from me, I didn't. I mean, I crammed, and at one point, all the knowledge was here, but when you cram, where does the knowledge go the next day? Somewhere else. Music theory, ear training and sight singing. I thought these were just mean and cruel ways to make my life miserable and had nothing to do with what I was about to do the rest of my life. Silly me. The problem is you don't realize that until you're in your third year. I had percussion methods my freshman year, spring semester at 8 a.m. I went to school in Pennsylvania. At 8 a.m. in the winter, it's cold. And you have to go outside. We had percussion methods with Gary Olmsted. You guys don't know that name. He's in the PASIC Hall of Fame. He was teaching percussion methods to us, to a bunch of snot-nosed kids that didn't realize who he was. And I'm like, yeah, you hit cymbals together, great, got it. What's next? Bass drum, yeah, hit it with a stick, good, what's next? It wasn't until I started to teach I realized, why does that sound so badly? That's because you're not teaching them how to play it correctly. Got the old monkey with the two cymbals like this, right? You got the bass drum, anyway. Pay attention in all these classes. Okay, so now we're going to go on to repertoire selection. You need to develop a criteria. It doesn't have to be my criteria. It just needs to be a criteria. How do you know whether a piece is a good piece or a not good piece? You don't have to read for me because you're all going, well, don't you have them written all right here? Yes. But look down through there. Are there any there? What makes a good bad piece for band? I've done honor bands in places in the country where trombones and flutes do not know how to play B natural. You know why? Everything they've played in their whole life to that point is in the key of B flat or E flat. I had flute players that only knew thumb B flat. We're tuning. And I said, flutes, that's a B natural. Play B natural. One person's playing B flat, playing B flat, playing B flat. So I said, would you please play your note? She's like, I'm playing a B. And she meant that right, because she was playing the only B she knew. And I went over and I did this with her thumb. And she went, oh, that's different. I said, yeah, that's a B natural. And let's talk about the B flat when we had this little finger down there. And she was like, really? You can get a B flat there too? Yeah, it's crazy. This is going to just blow your mind the next 2 days in this honor band. Trombones did not know how to play B naturals. B was in first position. And when I was trying to tell them, well, that's a form of B, but not the B we need in this particular. So I just stopped doing pieces in the key of C. I'm kidding. That was what I decided to. I was always going to do keys that they're not used to playing in, because you know why? We had band directors not doing their jobs. You know why? Because it's easier to just play B flat and E flat. Make my job as easy as I can. If you are somebody that's lazy, please change your majors tomorrow. I'll help. I'll tell you where to go. Please change your major. We have enough bad teachers out there and enough lazy people out there. We don't need any more of us in the profession. So just go and be a CEO for somebody instead of being a teacher. You're going to make more money anyway. It's all good. So predictability, limited keys and key centers. And what I mean by limited keys is no keys except one. Repetition, ostinato. How about transitionary music? You have all key changes were this. It's a snare drum key change, right? You get four bars away from that key, and then you start playing in a different key. No one knows, right? So you don't have any kind of harmonic progression or harmonic changes through that. It's all snare drum related. All triadic harmony. I almost had a mass. It was almost ugly in my band. The first time I got into polytonality, we had only done triadic harmony. Only done triadic harmony. I handed out, Menon's Canzona, Peter Menon's Canzona. Peter Menon wrote one piece for wind band. It's Canzona. He was an orchestral composer. Listen to his third symphony. Peter Menon, M-E-N-N-I-N, Symphony number 3, last movement, fourth movement. One of my favorite movements, okay? So we start playing. The whole beginning was polychords. G major and D major happening simultaneously. We played about 4 bars, and I thought I was going to have people throwing fists at each other in the band because everyone thought everyone was playing wrong notes. And I'm like, what in the world's going on? I'm like, oh my goodness, they have no idea what's happening. So I stopped and I said, whoa. It's everyone calm down. Bad teacher moment. I should have prepped you a little bit. With these instruments, boom, 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 play. All of a sudden there was a major chord and they were like, oh. It's like, okay, great. That's what we're used to. And I said, okay, now these people play. Okay, that's good too. Now everyone play your first note. And they went, oh, yes. So what are you doing to expand their ears and their understanding and awareness of harmony? Chordal harmony. Quintal harmony. You can even get into 12 tone. I really hate to say that. It's one of those things. But you can have melodic sounding 12 tone. Believe it or not, it's out there. You have to search for it, but it's out there. No key changes, no counterpoint, and no artistic integrity. Had a band composer. Composers that just compose usually have a contract to compose. And their contract is this. You have to write 4 grade 5 pieces this year. You have to write 2 grade 3s and 6 grade 2s and a couple grade 1s. So I was sitting at a table with Jack Stamp. I don't want to tell you the other guys because some of them were composers. One was a very, very, very well-known composer. And at the table, the question was asked. It was with my teacher, Gene Corporon was there, Jack Stamp was there, and a couple other very prolific band composers at the time. The question was asked to one of these band composers who did that for a living, how do you keep your composition fresh? When you have to write that much in a row, how do you keep the creative juices flowing? And he said, well, I write the 5s and the 4s first, and then when I get, the end of the year, I get to those 2s and 1s, I write them until I can just barely stand them, and then I send them to the publisher. And everyone at the table, I'm like, I think people's heads are going to explode after what I just heard. So I just put my fork down at that point, because we were eating breakfast. And I looked around the table, and no one looked up. Everyone was looking down at their food, except this composer. He's looking around going, what are you guys? That's what some of these composers are doing. They're writing a piece to fulfill their obligation, and they don't care if it's good or not good. Because you know what? I played a lot of this guy's music. Then I started to go back and listen to some of the new stuff that he was doing. I'm like, he's right. It's really not very good. Some of this is really good, some of this is not really good. And all composers are like that, right? I mean, I like all of Mahler, but I have things that are favorite. Number 2 is my favorite. I'm on a very, usually people don't say number 2's their favorite. Number 2's always been my favorite. But maybe it's because I heard it live with the Chicago Symphony for the first time. This is what Mahler first I heard, which is why I probably liked it. Now, how do we create bodies of repertoire? Maybe you don't like anything that's out there, which there's plenty out there. Commissioning. Identifying composers. You know where you find composers that you can afford? People that are trying to make a name for themselves. I can tell you most all composers. I have a lot of friends that are composers. There's a handful of them that I believe every time they come out with a new piece of music, it's better than the one before. Julie Giroux, great friend of mine. We just premiered her 6th symphony at TBA with all the technology. It's a three screen, multiple screen, surround sound with the audience symphony that I think she's going to come this spring when we play it. But she, I think, is really leading the way with composers as far as every piece I hear of hers, I'm like, yeah, how did you, what? And after we got, as we were playing this in July down in San Antonio, she said, I already know what's next. And I said, okay. And she said, you're going to think I'm crazy. I said, I already think you're crazy. You don't have to keep doing this to make me think you're more crazy. But then there's some composers that some of their best rep was some of the early stuff that they wrote to me. Like, I won't say any names, but some composers that like the first 3 or 4 pieces out of the chutes, I'm like, wow. And then they kind of got into a formulaic way of writing. And then it started to get a little bit stagnant to me. Right? So, commissioning. Who do you commission? Well, it depends on what you want. If you don't know who to commission, ask people that would know, composers. Probably a good place to start, right? Figure out who you might want to commission. Just so you know, the good composers, we just premiered Jim Stevenson's octet. Jim Stevenson is a pretty predominant composer right now. I just had a friend of mine here visiting this past weekend, and they just commissioned him to do a work. It's $2,000 a minute. So I said, well, let's call him for fun, which we might have done this. Let's call him for fun and say, we'd like to commission you for a 15-second piece. And he thought it was funny and then hung up at us, but that's okay. But you have those people that are getting $1,500 a minute, $2,000 a minute. You're thinking, okay, how do you get that money? Well, do you have a lot of friends? I've put together a lot of consortiums. I call friends of mine. I'm commissioning this composer to write this kind of a piece. It's going to be 6 minutes. The buy-in's $500. Do you want in? Easy way to do it. You create a consortium. You pay $100, you pay $100, you pay $100, you pay $100. You get 20 people that pay $100. All of a sudden you have money for a young and up-and-coming composer that wants to make a name for themselves. Usually those composers do a great job. You know why? They want it to be great. Then you get to a point where you do that enough, then composers start sending you stuff. The last 4 premieres that I've done where composers just sent me scores saying, if you like it, you can premiere it and record it. You know, you can premiere it if you'd be willing to record it and release it on a CD. You can premiere it, and I won't charge anything for the piece. Those have been the last 4 premieres that we've done. Well, Julie's Symphony. Somebody else commissioned it, but we did the premiere because she was unhappy with some things. But that's neither here nor there. Do you understand how that whole thing works? I know we're almost out of time. But commissioning is a great way, especially if you're teaching at a smaller rural school where maybe instrumentation's not ideal. Talk to somebody about flex instrumentation. I mean, I did a piece based on the Bogorodice Jeva of Rachmaninoff. I did it for wind band. And it works with as few as like 12 or 14 players. I just have the way I have it orchestrated, so you could do it with a small band, you could do it with a large band. You know, those are the types of things that you're really looking for. If any of you want to know more about commissioning and creating the body of work, please let me know. Criteria, this number 5, Roman numeral 5. Every time I sit down with the work, I ask every one of these questions of myself as it pertains to the piece laying in front of me on my desk. And you can say, oh yeah, sure. I'm looking at every one of these and asking myself, do I check that or do I not check that box? Now, have I played bad pieces? Yes. You know why? Some of them I commissioned. And I believe it's my obligation to premiere that piece regardless of whether maybe it missed the mark or didn't miss the mark. I owe the composer that. But there are some compositions that I've conducted that I'm like, this is not their best work, but it's okay. We have great conversations about it. What don't you like about it? What don't you like? What don't you think works? And in some ways, we actually were able to go back and revamp it and kind of work on it and make it better. Woody have those great relationships with those composers. Like the one guy, we asked him to write an 8-minute piece for solo trumpet, piano, and wind ensemble, and he submitted the 8-minute work to us. It was 25 minutes. And I said, Bruce, I really appreciate you writing this for us and writing this work, but it's not 8 minutes, or not even in the ballpark or 8 minutes. In fact, it's 3 times what the... And he said, yeah. And so as we start working on it, I'm starting to think, okay, boy, this section would really work well with this section. And I'm not a composer. I don't admit to pretending to be one. And we called and started having conversations. Measure so-and-so to so-and-so. Would you just think about taking that out and listening to how those two sections transition? I think they transition better without that material in there. And he'd get back to me and said, I think you might be right. And I said, I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, but as I'm going through here, I think it has more organic flow through it if we do. And so we've worked through some things that way. If you can check half of these off for the criteria selection, if you can check half these off, I think you've done a pretty good job of choosing a good piece. Some things you want to be careful of. Make sure you're choosing repertoire that are going to nurture and help your students grow, not things you want to conduct. It's not about you. It's never about you on the podium. If you think it is about you, or it's about you, then that's not good. It's not good. It's about the collaboration that takes place with the students on the stage. It's about the students. It's always about the students. When I come out at the beginning of the concert, the group behind me will stand. They're not standing for me. They're standing so I can recognize them for the audience, because there's no one in the audience that's going to be here to watch me conduct. They're here to hear you play. That's what it's about. It's always about the musicians on the stage, not the conductor on the stage. So make sure we're always thinking about that. We talked about historically significant pieces for those of you who are a band. Also talked about a few composers you should know. Most of those folks you probably talked about in music history, or you have talked about in music history, and you just weren't paying attention that day. Which I'm sure happens from time to time. Not here, though. I'm sure you guys are much more on it than some of the other institutions that I've taught at, but I'll throw that out there anyway. So, again, I spend a semester, actually I spent 2 semesters at the graduate level teaching about wind lit. So you got the Reader's Digest abridged version tonight, but we spent 2 semesters talking about rep, selection of rep, how to program, where do pieces go on a concert? How do you put pieces in a way to create flow from piece to piece to piece? You know what doesn't create flow? You play 5 minutes, then there's an 8-minute set change. Then you play for 6 minutes, then there's 15 minutes set change. If that's happening, you probably need to rethink the order with which you've constructed it. So they might be all great pieces, but they might not be in the right order that's conducive for an audience to really enjoy things. So questions? If I don't know the answer, I'll just make one up. Yes?
I actually have a 2-part question. So how would you...
I get nervous asking 2-part questions.
My bad.
Okay, no, go ahead.
How would you go about assessing like a new ensemble's skill level that you've never been a part of, and when do you know that it's like time to cut your losses and step back?
I will assess that group in warm-up. Folks, you don't need to hear them play a piece unless you want to get a sense of how good or not good their sight reading is. In warm-up, I listen to long tones, I'll listen to articulation, and I'll listen to some facility with scales and articulation. That'll give me a sense of what they're capable of. If I ask them to play a B-flat scale and somebody does, what's a B-flat? I know kind of where we are, right? Or we play a B-flat scale and everyone plays all the right notes, and I say, okay, let's do this. And then I don't hear that, or I hear people go, ha, 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 ha. So usually within 10 minutes of warm-ups, and we can talk, if you want me to come back at some point, we can construct a warm-up that will give you all the information you need to know within 10 minutes of the group playing a note for you. That you'll know, okay, here's what I need to do. Does that help? It's really about tone projection. Are they making good sounds? Check. Are they playing in tune? Check. If you try to tune a bad sound, you will hate your life. You can't tune a bad sound. How many of you have been in honor bands where, like, Bobby's playing a note, he's 20 cents sharp. Bobby pulls out because I told him he's 20 cents sharp. He puts the horn back on his face, and now he's 40 cents sharp, and he's pulled out. He's defying the laws of physics at that point. Because physics don't work that way. Do you guys have to take a science class as part of your degree? Hopefully it's a principles of sound class, is it?
It's just a lab.
Yeah, it's like biology, or it's like something that doesn't pertain to anything. Yes, when I was teaching in North Texas, all of the music majors had to take, I don't even know if they still do, had to take a principles of sound course. It's how the overtone series functions. Why does the overtone series work? It was physics, but it was physics like for the music majors, so it wasn't all this stuff where you're sitting there going, and start to drool a little bit because you're like, I have no idea what he's been talking about for 20 minutes. But it's like, how do sounds work? How does intonation work? Intonation, I mean, that's all based on science. Da-da-da. What was the second half of the question?
How do you know when it's time to step away from a piece that your ensemble maybe isn't prepared for?
You're going to hear me say this. You've not heard me say this yet. But this is, in fact, if you want to write this down, you can say it's yours and I don't care. It's our job, and this is a great question, it's our job to choose music that they can be successful at, but also pushes them past their current capabilities. My response to an ensemble that's maybe struggling and not coming in prepared to rehearsal, I've not programmed past your ability. I hope I've not programmed past your willingness to succeed. And I say that with a lot of groups. Did you hear what I just said? I have not programmed past your abilities, but I hope I've not programmed past your willingness to succeed. I know, and again, little tougher here not knowing who you're listening to in the blind auditions, but I know everyone's skill set. I know the rep that I've selected, and part of the selection of that rep is to help us overcome deficiencies with what we do. If we don't overcome the deficiencies, was it a little bit too far past? Is it a tempo thing that if I just change tempo slightly, it'll kind of fix it? Or is it a little bit too far past? That's happened to me before where I've gone, you know what? I've overshot. That's okay. That's on me, not you. And that's the other thing. Make sure that you understand and take, when something is wrong that you have done, own it and move on. Everyone makes mistakes. Own it and move on. If you don't make mistakes, you're not willing to admit you make mistakes, again, please get out. Not of the room, of the profession. Just get out. And so I've done that in my career. There have been times when I've had to pull something, and usually it's because of me, and I tell the ensemble that. I said, look, at this point, we are not at a place where we're going to be successful at this. My job as a conductor is to never choose something that we won't be successful at the end. There are times when my job is to choose stuff that we're not successful at the beginning of this. I can't double tongue. Well, you're sure as hell going to figure it out before we play this concert. Or whatever it is. And I've chosen sometimes where I'm like, you know what, we don't double tongue very well. And I'll in the summer I'll email the brass faculty or text the brass faculty saying, hey, we've been struggling with double tongue, multiple tonguing. We're playing this on the first concert, just so you know that when the students come to you going, help, we had this to play. I said, just so you know, they're going to come to you and they're going to say, I have this to play. Help me to get better at it. Part of what we do, the first rehearsal, and for us with inauguration, it was the first 2 rehearsals, we read everything, and then I say to the ensemble, you now know what you can and cannot do. I want you to keep the can where it is, and reshape the cannots so that it all works in the cannery. So hopefully that helped answer those two questions. Other questions, concerns, dinner plan? Yes, go ahead.
Where are some good places to find or learn about more rep?
More rep or quality rep?
Quality rep.
What I would do is I would check the pieces that win composition contests. The Oswald Award. I'm a member of the American Bandmasters Association. The Oswald Award is one of the big composition awards. One year it's awarded to a 5-6 composition. The next year it's awarded to a 2-3-4, and I actually serve on that committee. We'll listen to 50, 60 submissions every year. And it's not just, don't look for just the winners. If anything is on that list, it's probably okay. If you rely on just the publishers, you'll get great and bad side by side. You know what I would do? Who do you trust that knows, and you have a relationship with that person that you can ask, who do you trust? For me, I had some great mentor. The guy that I student taught with, Ralph Cribbs, he's passed away, was a great teacher. If I ever heard of a piece, I'd call him and say, do you know this piece? 99% of the time he's like, yep. I said, what do you think about it? Said, except for this and this and this and this, it's a pretty good piece. You know, he'd say like the clarinet goes over the break in some ridiculous ways, and the flute stays, you know, a couple notes on the flute shouldn't be up where they are, blah, blah, blah. And he would break it down like, but other than that, it's okay. I said, okay. So I find people you trust. Look at those things. Who are winning the Young Band Awards? The Fennell has a Young Band Award for young middle school music. You know, just find those, seek out those things. There are all a bunch, I know you guys aren't Facebook people because you're not old, but there are all kinds of groups where they talk about rep. If you want to geek out, you can find a group to geek out with. That's what we do as band directors. We sit down and talk rep. That's just because we can't stand anymore because we're old. Other questions? Somebody else have a hand up? Yes?
I was wondering, when you have like an emotionally heavy piece,
Uh-huh.
where do you put it in the order? Because to me it's like, most often I hear it second to last, and it's like, you know, super heavy, everybody's silent, and it's into the march, you know, right?
Yeah, well, and I think part of it is that part of it is the contour and shape of the concert also. Steve and Danny wrote a piece, Into the Silent Land, which was written for all the children that were killed in Sandy Hook. And it's for child narrator, a dead child talking to their parents. And the first time, sorry, I'm starting to get kind of choked up. On the concert, I'm like fighting back tears going, because I could see my children saying this, being deceased, and I'm going, oh my. Turned around and people are just bawling in the audience. And that wasn't the intent of the piece. The intent of the piece was to say, this composer didn't know how, this composer went to that elementary school. Knew people from that elementary school who taught there. They weren't the ones that happened to lose their lives that day. But this composer was not commissioned to write the piece. This composer wrote the piece as a way of healing for this, sending your child to school not knowing that the last words you said to them as they got out of the car that day were the last words they ever heard from you. And so those types of things and those types, that's something that I don't put at the end of any concert, because you have everyone going out like, right? And so what's after that? Because you don't do a concert of all of that stuff, right? And part of it is, if you have that, what's after it and what leads into that? That's not probably a piece you play right after intermission also. That's not a piece you play right before intermission. You know? And so, and figuring out how to communicate with the audience about what they're about to experience is something that's really important. This is the journey we're going to go on. And it's not for you to feel sad at the end, or it's not for you to feel, it's going to be how you're going to feel about it and what you hear in it. Because if you don't have children, you'll not hear it the same way that people that do have children hear it. If you're not, so it's, everyone hears it differently. I always tell honor bands, you never know who in the hall might need to hear what you're about to do. I always ask ensembles, here's where music starts. It doesn't start here. Music for me, you'll never see me as a conductor ever conducting in the front of my body, because this is a guarded stance. I am protecting myself from you. I'm keeping you at arm's length because of where I'm conducting. I don't conduct this way. If you see me conduct, my hands are always apart, and it's because here's where the people sitting in front of me, I hope, see this is where my music making begins. Channeled through here into my hands and the words that I say, and I ask the ensemble members standing and sitting in front of me to do the same thing back. I said to Wind Ensemble just this week, I said, you don't look like the music is sounding currently. And I said, if we don't look like the music sounds, the audience won't have the same connection to it. But if they see us looking like the music, what we're doing is we're not playing music at them, we're trying to help them to experience what we're experiencing. But if we're experiencing something, well, whatever. Business-like, dun, 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 dun. Okay, good, thank you very much. But to me, that's not what music makes. That's not why we're all sitting here. We're all in this room because we had a teacher that we wanted to be like. I want to be for my students what that teacher was for me. Would that be a fair assessment for most of you here? We all had teachers. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing what I do. I went to an honor band in 9th grade, and I'm like, I want to do what he does. At that point, I was a football player. And I played football until my junior year, and then I realized I probably should do this marching band thing if I'm going to be teaching it eventually. So, taught at a small school, was able to do a little bit of both, but it's those types of things. But there's some thought into that because you have to navigate in and out of those things. But at the end of the day, to have that kind of a feeling at the end, we've communicated what the composers has wanted to communicate. And I don't want the ensemble sitting in front of me crying, but I want the ensemble to sit there at the end and be physically drained from what they just put into the music. I had a father at one point, I was doing an honor band in Philadelphia, and this dude was huge. He came up to me after the concert, he said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And I'm like, "Yes, sir." I'm 6 foot 250, he had to have been 6'8", 340. And he said, "Can we go over there?" And I'm like, "Yep, as long as you..." It was the all-Catholic honor band of Philadelphia. I looked at Sister Madeline and I said, "Can you keep an eye on me over here? I don't know what's about to happen." So he comes over and he said, "I'm driving to this honor band today, and it's the third honor band in the last 2 months." And I'm like, "I'm sorry? You shouldn't have your daughter playing so many honor bands, sir." And he said, and so I'm sitting there and I get in the audience and I'm sitting down there and he said, "And then you play that slow piece," whatever that slow piece was, and it was actually October. And he said, "Well, then I start tearing up. What did you do to me?" And I said, "I didn't do anything to you." I talked to everyone is that October's a reflective kind of piece. It's not a sad piece, but it's a reflective piece. And I said, when students on stage trust each other, because music making is at its most sincere form when every musician on stage trusts each other, and there's a trust between, if you don't know, do you know James Jordan? Choral folks probably do. He was the book called Musicians Trust by James Jordan. He's a choral conductor. But he talked about how to create connectivity between the ensemble and the conductor. When there's that kind of trust, there's a sincerity with the music making that the audience hears. Whether they realize it or not, it's sincere. It's just not, you're just not playing at something. You become what it is. You become what that is. And so when we play these things, we want them to have that kind of reaction. So I'm doing an honor band, and I tell my kids that there's somebody out here that needs to hear what we're about to do. We don't know, it might be 1, it might be 10, and I'm telling them this before the concert. We get to the end of the concert, I'm standing on the edge of the stage, and I feel something on my pant leg. This little old lady pulling on my pant leg, like, "Excuse me, sir, excuse me." I'm like, "Yes," and she said, "I just want to thank you." I said, "Well, hey, thank you. It was a lot of fun. We enjoyed it." And she said, "No. She said, "I was notified today that I had some family in a bad car accident, and there's some people that they're in a very bad way, and we don't know whether they're going to make it or not. So I sat here before the concert wondering whether I should leave or whether I should stay, and I decided to stay, and I'm so glad I did, because it helped me hear. It helped me hear to hear these kids do what they did for the last hour. Isn't that why we make music? To make the world a better place? We don't make music to just say, here's a concert, there you go, where's the beer? Right? We make music to make the world a better place. There's enough destruction in the world. I believe my job is to offset that destruction as best I can, and to get as many people to understand and to appreciate what we're doing and buy into the process. We play a concert Thursday night. We're going to talk to the ensemble about this week as we get ready for that concert. When we sit down to play a concert, it's a celebration. It's a celebration of all of us playing together in unison with common goals and aspirations. And it should be something that's enjoyed, and it's something that, what COVID taught me, something that we should never take for granted, because we never know when it's not going to be there. We never know when our last concert's going to be our last concert. John Philip Sousa conducted a concert, went backstage, and died in his dressing room. I'm sure leaving stage, he didn't know that that was about to happen. For me, every time I get a chance to make music, I'm making music with a sincerity, knowing that if this is the last time I get to make music in my life, it was worth it. As opposed to one-offing it, going, oh, it's just another concert. But do some of us approach that like that? It's another concert, let's just get through this concert. Just need to get through this concert. Or is it an opportunity to make the world a better place? And that person in the audience that needs to hear this, we're going to give it to them, whatever that might be. And for every person, it might be different. Somebody might just need a distraction from their life. Their life's upside down, and they just need something like going into a good movie, right? You lose sense of time. You walk out of a good movie, and you're like, how was it? That was 2.5 hours? It seemed like an hour, right? Some people, all they need is a distraction from life going sideways. Some people need to hear something where it's nurturing, where they need their soul filled with some beauty, and that's what it might be. And we don't know what that is. All we can do is do what we can do and what we need to do. I think we're out of time because he's about to get the shepherd's. Let's give Dr. Genevro a round of applause.